Does anyone else have the music playing in their head as they're doing the intro? No, is it just me?
Yes.
Yeah, I don't.
I
I do
not.
not.
As well.
But
I have it as my ringtone.
Can you sing it for us now, David?
I have it as my
like
ringtone anyway.
I could play it now. I could play it through the...
No, play it now with your voice.
No. Welcome to the latest episode of the Testing Peers. We're going to be talking about toxicity in the testing space, what it means for us, and we're going to have a basic time to rant and complain about stuff that really gets on our wick. We've got the two people back from EuroSTAR. So we have Chris.
Hey.
We have Russell.
Hello.
And we have Simon.
Hello.
And myself, David. We're delighted that Saffron QA continue to sponsor the podcast. Saffron QA is a specialist in testing recruitment, offering permanent, contract, and a newly developed retained recruitment service. More details can be found in the show notes, or please reach out to Ben directly to find out more. So before we get on to toxicity, let's pass you over to Simon for the banter.
So I did some research on this, and I think this is one, reading the question, it caused me quite a lot of anxiety to even think about it, but I thought it'd be an interesting topic to come to. And partly because I'm semi-addicted to my phone, this is probably part of the problem. But if you had to delete all but 3 apps off your smartphone, which 3 would you keep?
Is this inclusive of the ones that you actually can't delete, or are we kind of assuming that we're able to keep a text messaging app and things?
Stop being the tester, Christopher.
But we can't.
It makes a difference, Maybe I can have a phone that doesn't make phone calls. That might be kind of cool.
Well, yeah. Okay, let's ignore the ones that are stuck to your phone that you can't remove. Which 3 would you keep out of all the apps that you have on your phone currently? And I am literally thinking I cannot make this choice. So while you're talking, I'm going to scroll for my phone and see if I can work out the 3 that would be.
This is podcast gold, everyone. We're all looking at our phones.
Go on, David, you go first.
Well, I can think of mine are pretty boring, actually. Slack, because that's where the testing peers are, so I couldn't live without that.
Oh.
The second one would be music. I would keep the music app because I need music. The third one's a bit tricky because obviously we are the testing peers on the podcast, so perhaps I should keep off us, but I don't listen to my own podcast. So therefore my third one would be banking, because I like to know and keep a note on my money.
Sensible.
Cool. Russell?
I want to be radically different from David, but I'm not sure I can be. Slack is probably a sensible one to be able to rant to you guys and others and share the good news as well as the bad. I'd probably go with the BBC News site to kind of stay abreast of what's going on in the world. And then I'd probably go banking as well, because I like to keep an eye on what's going on with the money that isn't pouring in or out.
We're so similar.
Wow.
Yeah.
I was expecting... Chris, come on, bring some excitement to this banter.
I'm very exciting. So I've made a huge assumption here that I've got a browser that I can't remove, and therefore I can shove things like Twitter into that space rather than having the app. So I'm going to try and have a bit more fun.
Always thinking.
Spotify, I think, in terms of what I consume from audio would satisfy
from the web, can't you, as well?
That need. I don't know if I can do it from the web on my mobile phone. I've never tried. That's a fun game to play. Right, I'm not going to try it right now because I'm wearing my headphones that are connected to my PC, not on my phone, and who knows what will happen if we do that. Anyway, so Spotify is one. Football Manager is another. That game on my phone is wonderful. Nowhere else in the world will it be possible to get Cambridge United to the Champions League glory that I did, with still real players, so it's possible. Honestly, we're hoping for Mark Bonner and success to defeat Peterborough United this coming season.
Not going to happen.
And then I think the third one is Google Maps, because I use my phone. Russell's showing off Spotify there for all the podcast gold listeners. I use my phone for sat-nav when I'm driving. It helps me know where I'm going and what the hell's going on. And that's important to me. So Football Manager was about as exciting as it gets.
Do you not have a sat-nav in your car?
No, I don't have a sat-nav in my car. And if I did, I'd probably have to pay an extortionate fee to update it. I quite like the live traffic updates. I could have gone with Waze, couldn't I? But a sat-nav app of some description.
Put mine for me now, because that's what I was going to go with. Cool.
I am the fun stopper, so I apologize.
Yeah, fun sheriff and everything. Yeah, I was going to go with Waze. My wife gets frustrated that I use Waze because it does seem to randomly take me down single track roads rather than where Google Maps wouldn't. We had that happen in Devon, where everyone else from the house we were staying at went along the main A road to get to the beach, to Woolacombe, and ours took us over a single track road over a hill and down past lots of farm fields with sheep wanting to come out onto the road and everything. So we got to experience the real Devon.
Yours sounds more fun. Definitely sounds more fun.
It was more fun, but more anxiety inducing as well. So I would have said Waze, and music, definitely Apple Music in my case rather than Spotify. And the third one,
other brands are available for anyone out there.
Well, you said Spotify. Someone else said Spotify. I said Apple Music. I honestly don't know. Maybe it's Wordle, just for my daily. Well, it's not technically an app. It's
I was going to say that.
It's a web app, but I've got it saved as a desktop icon, so I can do that every day. Yeah, I'd do that, I think. Just give my brain a challenge every day.
I'm starting to think that based on all our things, the internet is the thing that we can't deal without.
Yeah, it comes down to that.
Not really that bothered, but we all kind of have a thing for things you can do on the web.
If we can do it on the web, then
we'd survive. Yeah.
So bit of a tenuous one tonight. It was interesting to find out a bit more. Good. So toxicity and testing. Where do we start?
Automate everything.
That's certainly one place to start.
Why can't you test everything by the end of the week? Or I'm referring to people who think and speak like this, really, rather than the actual questions themselves. But the people that have a very narrow-minded view or have read something somewhere and try and extrapolate it to be the solution to every problem, I think is probably some of the toxicity I see around.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think the automate everything is still a big thing, especially in people that aren't in testing. And their perception is that if we're automating, then we can automate all of it and therefore remove the need for us going forward, which is a constant battle and trying to re-educate teams of people that don't really get what we do.
I think that's true. I think the automate everything is a classic example of, as you say, Simon, people that are not part of test. And one of the worst things is for people not out of test telling testers how best to test. And
that's easy to say, wasn't it?
Yeah. And we get it all the time. We do get it all the time, is that other people give us stuff that they've come up with, be it test case, be it user stories that are not requirements, anything that is not actually testable. And we're constantly challenging them. And actually that can cause conflict as well as part of that.
Well, I mean, we've got politics in the workplace, budget, misunderstanding, misappropriation of ideas. There's many, many things that trigger and aren't helpful. Also, people thinking that they can do the job all by themselves, the kind of rockstar solution. There's hack fixes, tech debt, lots of lack of respect.
That's a good one, yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with that one.
And real lack of clarity and joined up thinking in places where some people seem to know more than others, almost like a gatekeeping of knowledge. I mean, gatekeeping in testing is another thing, but gatekeeping of knowledge, like knowledge is power. I shouldn't share the thing because I'm better than you, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and the knowledge one particularly, I think that's one that I've had quite a bit of experience with, especially when we're dealing with offshore teams. When they've got the knowledge, it's certainly very difficult sometimes to try and wrestle that knowledge back from them, to try and bring the knowledge in-house rather than having it within the supplier base. That's certainly a challenge, and that can cause additional toxicity because then you get details being hidden and they're keeping stuff to themselves. They're not sharing stuff with you, and it just makes it even worse going forward. So it's a difficult one to try and manage and to try and put the right message in place to say, look, you need to share this because it actually will help us if we all know what we're doing, rather than you keep what you do, we do ours, and we don't work together. It just makes it worse if it's not shared.
Why do you think people do that? Do they think they're indispensable by not sharing knowledge?
I think it's part of that. I think it is definitely, when I've worked with in-house teams that have had individuals doing that, it has been because they've got an insecurity that if they share the knowledge, they'll be replaced. So that's definitely the case. With the suppliers and the offshore, I don't know, to be honest, whether it's just we need to keep a reason for you to be paying the money to us. It's a difficult one to try and understand.
I think sometimes there are definitely suppliers with that attitude, as in, let's keep you on the hook, so to speak. But I have to say, it's changed a lot from the suppliers I've worked with and the suppliers I am, I guess. There's always some.
Yeah. It's the thing, though. Knowledge is power, I think, is the thing we've grown up with.
Yeah.
Even outside of testing, if I know something, that means I'm better than you. And the measures of, even in education stuff, the measure of how good you are at something is what you know. It's not about how you apply it. It's not about how you share it. It's not about how you teach it. It can be a symptom of the education system failing us. Us seeing those things throughout our careers, we're also seeing those things manifest themselves in professional workspaces where people learn something or they're able to do something and they keep hold of that because that is what they've been taught. You need to go and learn those things too. You need to go through those hoops. You need to suffer the same things that I had to suffer to get to where I am. And what that does, the consequence of that is that people aren't going to be able to progress and do greater things than we did because they're going to have to get forced through a whole bunch of stuff that slows them down and be able to achieve these things. And it's to vicious cycle, and I think it's very toxic for the industry if that is the way things are. And it isn't the way it is everywhere, but it is almost counterproductive in a world where we are measured as individuals about what we know and what we do and how we are measured for our own output. Like, it's easier to measure what you know and what you do rather than what you teach and what the sort of some of the intangibles are. And that's quite frustrating.
I think you're right about education, because actually, if you think about the education system, you learn all your knowledge and then you are asked questions to test that knowledge. And some people go through life expecting to be asked questions, and there are some obstinate people that will only ask the questions that are asked themselves. And you can just get one word answers. I have worked with people before where you go up to them and you ask the question and they answer it directly. And then you go away and think, oh, actually, they didn't give anything more. So therefore I need to now go back and possibly frustrate them because they didn't give any extra information. So I need to ask more questions and pitch those questions right so that I get the information in a second sitting with them.
I think the education piece is another. There's so much with it as far as getting into that loop where you feel you have to continuously re-educate people outside of the testing teams on what we're doing and why we're here and our value and what we can deliver. It gets to a point where you do get that fatigueness of why is it so difficult for people to understand the importance of what we do. We're not a tick box organization. We're not just here to tell you it's passed or failed. We're here to help you deliver quality software. We're not here to sign off stuff. We're here to provide information. We're here to constantly help you understand more about the product and learn where it works well and where it doesn't work and how we can improve that. Sometimes feels like you're out of the meeting, you're out of the discussion of it, and then 2 hours later you suddenly get, oh, can you sign off on this for us? Were you not in that meeting earlier where we talked about how we don't do signing off? We're actually here to provide information to you. And sometimes I feel like it is an issue where, going back to being the single point of failure for knowledge, sometimes it's that, I'm the gatekeeper. And there are people within the testing world that still want that. I'm the gatekeeper. I'm responsible for holding this software off and going into production. But then there's also the business side that, okay, testers are the gatekeepers. We need to check with them before we go live. We need to do this. We need to ask for their sign-off. And it just feels like we're trying to be proactive in being collaborative and being on the front foot and trying to help you learn more about your product on a proactive nature, but you're still putting us back in that box that we're the ones that are the gatekeeping the results and allowing it to go live that way.
There's sometimes two angles to that, though. And maybe I'm wrong with this, but sometimes they value your input so much that they want to know what you think versus you're the gatekeeper. As in, have the testers looked at it? What's their opinion on it? Versus testers say yes or no. It's like, look, tell me what you think of the quality of this product.
There is that. Maybe it's perception or the vibes that we're getting sometimes that you defer to the one that sounds more negative.
Yeah, no, if it is, no, don't get me wrong. You can't release unless Dave the tester says so. That's the bit of the problem. If it's, what does Dave think? Give us your input. Help us make a decision, then it's great, isn't it? I don't know why I said Dave, but any Daves out there, hello.
There is a thing, though, to your point before, Simon, where it's not always explicit, but there is still a feeling that testing and quality is still up and belongs to testers, whether that is something that is a real gatekeepery thing or where we're the only ones who know how this should really be done. And I don't know if sometimes there's a level of toxicity in the sense that there is fears, genuine fears amongst the testing community where they're being replaced or being pushed to the side and they're worried for their own careers. But there's also the whole concept that it's a second-class citizen or whatever. And there's a real sort of, it's quite hard to articulate because I think that we've spoken sort of the testing mindset thing, that it isn't just one thing, but there are real examples of testers clinging on to testing and it being their thing, either implicitly or explicitly within their teams. A testing column in your Kanban board, or your definition of done requiring the tester to sign something off, or there being explicitly a test manager assigning test resources in different teams. That isn't always going to be something that is required, because ultimately our goal as a company, an organization that produces software, is to have good quality software that we have lots of confidence in, and for that quality to be owned by the whole team. And that's not always going to be a test team. And some people are triggered by the term test team. Some people are triggered by the term test manager. I remember being introduced to somebody at a conference before, and they said, "What's your title?" I was like, "Oh, I'm test manager." They said, "We don't need test managers in testing." And they walked away.
Sorry about that, Chris.
Without knowing me, without knowing my context, without understanding any of those things.
I mean, every organization, the context is different. And this is part of the frustrations I've had recently with conversations on social media as well. So, we can dive into that part of the toxicity is people set out views that their view is right. That model's wrong. It's always wrong. Or this term of testing is wrong. We need to be using this term instead. It sets that tone straight away that if you're not doing it my way, you're wrong, you're stupid, you're whatever. And it sets that internal insignificance, or that I'm inferior, therefore I'm not good enough at my job. And you take that into your workplace and you realize, actually, guys, we're doing it all wrong. I've seen this post somewhere, or I've read this, and we need to be doing this instead. And rather than it being a positive of, hey guys, we can learn something new, it's a we're rubbish at what we're doing. We need to think about how we're doing it and do it better. And it can snowball into a worse feeling of the whole team suddenly feeling that we're not valued, we're not very good. You
just hit a nail on the head. Twitter is a classic one of the amount of people that are criticizing, the people that kind of attack.
Yeah.
Twitter, there's not that many people in the real world, in my day-to-day life, that are as aggressive or as criticizing as the people I find on Twitter. Now, I don't know whether Twitter brings out the worst in that behavior, but that's one of the toxic behaviors there is, that all you do is criticize, you don't take notes.
Yeah.
You see people that do it and no one wants to be around you. And obviously, as testers, one of the things we're doing is generally criticizing our developers' work if we do it badly. We're actually finding information to help make a product better, work in collaboration. But if we get it wrong, we can come across as the criticizers, the enemy, the sort of the pessimists and all that sort of thing. And they're draining. And we've got to be careful of that tightrope, I think, because it is easy I think, as testers, to slip down those roads.
Yes,
even easier on Twitter.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And I think different social medias have there's different toxicities as well. I think, Twitter's definitely the more outright aggressive one sometimes with things. But then you get LinkedIn, which is another type of toxicity where it's almost a passive aggressive one, or the more sort of old-fashioned communication styles that get...
Me, I'm amazing. You aren't as amazing as me.
Exactly.
And I think going back to basically a previous podcast, the models one, and also what Simon and Chris were saying about the way that we do things. Context is completely the thing. Just because of the way that other people are doing things doesn't mean to say that we're doing things wrong. But I think with social media, with the way that people are going, oh, I'm doing wonderful things, it can make other companies feel a bit inferior and that they're not cutting edge. They're not. But actually, if you're doing the job well and producing a quality product, then actually you're doing well. You are doing a successful job. And so therefore, you don't necessarily need to change things immediately. It's probably keep up with technology or whatever to help you do your job better. But actually, if ain't broke, don't necessarily look for things to improve.
Exactly that. As long as you're evolving and you're improving as a group, organically, and it's working and you're delivering products of quality and there's not major issues with it, then you're doing a good job. And absolutely, as you say, David, there's no need to suddenly feel you have to bow to the trends that are currently being shouted about by some of the industry leaders. It's just a case of you have to know what you're doing and you have to be comfortable in yourselves as a team that you're delivering something well and you're doing it to the best of your abilities and you're learning and you're growing and you're trying new things and you've got that culture of learning, you've got that culture of learning and growing quality. If you're not in that situation and it is a toxic environment where you do feel like you're being told to do things that are against every grain of your body, then yes, absolutely, you should be ranting about it, but not necessarily externally, ranting about it internally and trying to find a way to jivvy people up to try and think about new ideas. I sometimes think that social media becomes the outburst of people's rants rather than actually being of any benefit to anyone.
I know there's been times where I've been toxic and I'll not pretend otherwise, that I've been that miserable, so annoyed, pissed off at the world, pardon my French, and just everything has just been, I've been probably an energy drain to a lot of people because I'm just so annoyed, frustrated. Often it takes me a week or two to be able to turn that into a positive, into the right, okay, I'm so annoyed now, what can I do to change that? And I can't flip the switch as quick as I wish. I'm going to apologize on this podcast now for those I've been toxic to. I'm sorry. And I'll try my best to avoid doing it again.
There is a thing that you've done there. You've modelled a bit of accountability and actually fronting up to things, though. And actually, here's another thing that's toxic. People not fronting up to things, not taking responsibility for things, not apologising for behaviour, even if they know that it's damaging, it's harmful. There are places where there's been bullying, where there's been disrespect. And we've heard people have been outright lied to. They've been excluded from things. They've been demoted, and all these things. And this happens, and this is damaging. And part of my talk I did at EuroSTAR is talking about having the ability to actually sanitize your organization, and knowing how things can be like cleaned, how toxicity can be removed, and how you can escalate those things. And understanding the culture and how your company, an organization works is one thing, but also the communities in which we participate, be that via, well, Twitter's not really that great in terms of codes of conduct, but if we are operating within a community such as our friends at Ministry of Testing or other conferences or events and meetups and stuff, there are codes of conduct, and there are still going to be moments of toxicity.
Yeah.
There are still going to be elements where people are spoken down to, they're disrespected, where they're not included. Actually, we can all be guilty of these things. We've discussed a long time ago different biases and things that we're guilty of. I think actually, as testers, one of our main things is about giving feedback and having the freedom to be able to do those things. That should be encouraged and celebrated, even if it's really difficult to do. And hopefully the people who are called out, given that sort of feedback, are able to do as Russell modeled there and actually apologize and not do those things again.
As we said earlier, I think we've all been guilty of that toxicity ourselves. I've certainly been one that's bitten back on social media when I shouldn't have done, or someone's got a new idea, or then a new tool vendor has advertised telling me that their tool's going to solve all my problems, and I've been quite blunt and open in the way I've sent it back, and then I've regretted it afterwards because I'm doing it in a public forum. And actually that's part of me sort of realizing that actually I don't need to be doing this in a public way. I don't need to be berating or pushing back against people in a way that can cause animosity in any form. And I've got to the point where I think the only place that I feel I can be truly myself in a social context is our own Slack, because the others are all, there's always stuff that riles me or triggers me or wants me to bite back at something, and that I have to restrain myself from saying something in a negative connotation with negative connotations that won't end well. And then realizing where my safe place is to have those kind of conversations. And I think because we've grown our Slack organically, slowly, with people that we know, we trust, etc., it has enabled us to have much more open, frank conversations, disagreements, without getting nasty, without having any of that and that toxicity. And I think that's one thing we should be proud of in the way we've built it as well.
One thing I was going to go back to, Simon, about is sort of tool vendors and salespeople. We've looked for tools before, and they've highlighted a long list of companies that have used their tool. And actually, I don't really care that they've used the tool, because actually I want to know whether it works in our context.
Yeah.
It might be one small group that used it on one small project, and it may be a big company, but I don't really buy it. You know, I need to know that the tool is right for me. And that's a big thing for me. And they don't always tell you the things that will help you do your job. They're full of the sales pitch. If I want this, and this, and they promise the world, and then their demo or whatever, they don't actually demonstrate the things. And it's like the conversation never happened.
Yeah, been there with that. And actually, you say about the companies, the slide of all the company names, I got sent an email by mistake by a tool vendor that literally was meant to be to one of his colleagues. And it said in the text, oh, we're very close to getting EasyJet's name added to our slide because they might actually take up our free trial. And it was just like, in that second, it was almost, they go with, it's not, all those companies on the slide, they're not even companies that are paying for their product. They're companies that are possibly taking the trial on. And then they're just going, oh, we can use them on the site. So it's just, yeah, it's the magic of sales, I guess, in some ways. It's an interesting one.
Always check the terms and conditions.
I think we ranted quite a bit about tool vendors on our last ranting episode. So I don't want to open another can of worms there too much.
There are good tool venders as well. And there are tool
there
vendors
are some very good ones
that take the time to understand context and actually participate in the community. We're not tarring the entire anything, really. Like, there are good versions of everything. But
again, what it comes down to is the companies that take time to get to know the community, get to know the people, rather than just sending an email saying, we can solve all your testing problems, our product does this for you. And you're like, no, you know nothing about our context. You might have worked with other airlines, you've not worked with us. It's kind of just simple things like that. And it's just like, everyone thinks they can solve your problems. And it's just, sometimes I think it just riles me every time I get the email.
There's a segue we can take here, because there's the toxicity of not understanding context and people coming in and trying to resolve problems and issues without understanding the people, all the stuff that's going on. Like, big bang starters in organizations, sometimes wanting to join a new project and make a big splash without necessarily appreciating what has come before, who the people are, what their constraints are, what struggles they've really had, not having those conversations, not understanding the people. All of those things happening are the same complaints we have about tool vendors, because they haven't understood the context and therefore aren't suggesting solutions to problems that actually apply to our situation.
Very true.
So I was going to turn this round a little bit to end on a bit of a positive note. What can we do positively to mitigate the toxicity that we find in testing?
Call it out where we feel comfortable and confident to do that. I find it very difficult to do that on a public stance, but I'm quite happy to go and talk to people directly. If I have an established relationship with those people, I'm very happy to talk to them and call them out and say, this thing I don't think is right. This thing I think is wrong. Be that a conference organizer where you look at it and go, it's a bit white, or with their program, or where you've been in meetings with certain people and you say, did you know you're kind of coming across as a little bit of a expletive in the way you're being quite disrespectful. Those sorts of things are really important. If we are privileged enough to be in a position where we can, then we should.
To be honest, if I was being toxic, someone did that to me, I would be forever grateful, because you don't often spot it when you're in there.
No, I would agree with that. I think if I was being toxic, I would want someone to tell me that something wasn't right. And it may not even be a case of just bluntly calling it out. It may be a case of just checking in on that person to start with and just, is everything all right? Your comments there were a bit unusual for you, kind of thing. It can be enough for them to go, yeah, I shouldn't have done that. That was silly of me.
The other thing I would do is surround yourself with allies, so you can talk about things and discuss with like-minded people the best way to look at these situations, because sometimes we might be a bit more blasé and be a bit more public and regret it. So therefore, finding other people to go, well, what's my next move? What should I do? Should I ignore it? Should I react again to that particular post or whatever? Surround yourself with allies so that you can discuss those situations as you go forwards.
And talk about things. Like the more we talk about things, the better we refine our own thoughts and processes and the way we respect things. Talk about things, but also listen to other people's perspectives, read about other things, understand where conflicts have happened or bad things and toxic things have been other examples, and really consume that to try and find how people have solved problems in other situations so that we are better versed. Should those things happen in our context or to people that we are accountable with, we can actually point them towards positive outcomes for these things. Because if you just turn a blind eye to everything, then I don't think that's really helpful. So being well versed, well read on those things, take the time and the opportunity to talk about these things and read about them and understand them, that will help us do those things more. And if we get the opportunity in sort of leadership roles to actually model how we deal with these things, how we talk about those things, that's helpful because it normalizes calling out toxicity and normalizes dealing with it. It normalizes moving on. It normalizes all of these important things that shouldn't be taboo. They shouldn't be behind doors. Maybe in some circumstances they should, but actually it's important that we talk about these things, because otherwise people just think that's an industry standard. That stuff carries with them. They get baggage. They leave the industry. They think that's just how it is.
As leaders, we have to set the tone for others, don't we? So if they don't see us calling it out to the people, then we set a bar that it's acceptable and so on. And that's part of it, is the visibility of you kind of tackling these things sometimes in a constructive way, not, sticking your thumb out to your nose and going, meh.
Yeah, and I think sometimes, again, as a leader, it's about knowing when the right time is to front it, when the right time is to protect your team. I tried to protect my team from my own toxicity this afternoon when I had particularly, as I said to some of the guys before we started recording, I was in a right grump before we started some of the stuff that had happened today. But my team, I tried to make sure I masked in front of them in the meetings we had this afternoon, because I did not want to show them my frustrations. I didn't want my team to then feel the same anger and frustration that I was feeling. I needed them to still feel the positivity and be looking forward to what we're building, and let me deal with the things that I need to deal with to get us back on the front foot. But I had to mask that from them. I didn't want them to see, because as soon as they ask, are you okay? And I end up telling them all what's gone on, then it's going to make things worse for them. So I needed to protect them from that and get myself into a good place before we start delving into it and resolving things.
That's a very good point to end on, I think. Is it not? Thank you once again for joining us. Thank you to our sponsors, Saffron QA. You can find out more about the testing peers on all your social media channels that we just ranted about. So you can find us on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, Patreon, There's probably places, Instagram, we're everywhere. And you can obviously listen to our podcast from pretty much any good podcast provider. Apple Music, Spotify, we're on them all. So thank you once much. I hope you've liked listening to us on Toxicity, and we look forward to you listening to our rants and our talks and our chats and our discussions again in the future. Thank you.
For now, it's goodbye from the testing peers.
Goodbye.